The late great 20th century literature professor Northrop Frye has an actual definition for what art people mean when referring to the truth and beauty of a work of art. Believe it or not, this stuff can actually be defined. I feel like I got a grasp on at least the truth part, worded here as a correspondence between phenomenon and verbal sign. By phenomenon, he means an external phenomenon occurring in the real world outside the work of literature, usually the natural phenomenon or social phenomenon associated with the words on the page you're reading, which are the verbal signs he's referring to. So the truth that people talk about when referring to the truth and beauty behind artwork are the moments where your mind, as a member of the audience, suddenly gets a flash of something from your own real personal life that you relate to in the artwork. It can be an extremely fast flash of imagery, or a vague instant of verbal word associations, or even a more abstract, indescribable emotional feeling that somehow reminds you of real life. And I feel like that is a pretty useful definition to work with for explaining why Judero is such a good game, especially for a disillusioned longtime video game critic like me. Judero has helped me through some tough times, and helped me overcome a disillusionment that I have been feeling towards the medium, because the game engages with a very powerful sense of that kind of truth. I also want to say the game has a powerful sense of realism to it, despite not being a realistic game at all. It is also certainly a beautiful experience, despite that word absolutely not applying to the look that many of these characters are going to give you at first glance. The beauty behind Judero is so much more about how they make you feel. Here's one of the truths I'm talking about. Early on in Judero, there's a little panorama vista where a pretty river valley leads off to some kind of picturesque castle on a hill. The game's made out of old toys and putty figures clay-mated into motion, and a lot of assets kinda look like some scribbly marker doodles on paper. So playing it was, very naturally, triggering a lot of childhood memories of playing with toys, including one that I would have forgotten for like 27 years. One day long ago, back in the days where I would want to use a Spice Girls song if I had the license for it, back when I was a tiny child in 1998 who thought that The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time was mankind's greatest achievement since the moon landing, I had a little play date with another kid who very much thought the same. We scribbled out little cardboard swords and shields with markers on poster board, cut them out and whacked each other with them, and reacted as if giving each other paper cuts with paper swords was the funniest thing we'd ever seen in our lives, because at that age it probably was. And I almost forgot that memory over all these years until Judero triggered it right here at this very spot. There was some kind of intersection of associations between the magic marker on the paper and the billboarded flatness of those distant objects, and the memories of the inspirational Zelda game in question also having flat assets. No one was calling it billboarded sprites back then, but they weren't fooling anyone back then either, and that all got me remembering something that otherwise would have been forgotten. And all of that just came in like a 1-second flash. All of those memories came flooding back in like 30 frames worth of time. Judero! Judero is a top-down 2.5D Zelda-like adventure that has triggered some of the strongest emotional responses that I have felt towards a game in many years. But the reasons why do not fit into the typical molds of any typical video game review. In fact, it kind of has me rethinking the way I've always done game criticism. Mechanically speaking, it's an easy-peasy simple hack and slash where combat is kind of just about whacking things with the stick when you're not dodging out of the way of things with the dash. There's a Kirby-inspired ability where you possess enemies and use their abilities to solve puzzles, but most of the extra combat upgrades and even getting tactical at all about the combat can be ignored, and that is not a great way to talk about Judero. That is not what it feels like to play Judero. It may be a conventionally serviceable description for a reviewer playing Judero, but I'm sorry, it's not. I usually try to talk about the aesthetic themes that are evoked by a game's mechanics, but this is a case where the aesthetic themes have the mechanics by their throat. They are so unremarkable, but to a deliberate point that just ends up making Judero relaxing to play. It is mentally refreshing to play. The ease and simplicity of its gameplay really help your mind wander to the places the game developer seems to want you to go inwardly. Instead of thinking about combat mechanics or resource management or how to criticize those things, I was thinking of childhood memories of playing with toys. The gameplay won't be demanding your attention, it's just a meditative hook to keep the fingers busy with stuff you already know from pure muscle memory, so the mind can listen to itself think about something that's actually worth thinking about here in this game. Also, the low difficulty level seems to be making a kind of humorous point of its own about just how emotionally meaningful video game combat and puzzles can ever really be at this point in game history. The minigames are absolutely a parody of traditional arcade-descended game design. There's a couple tough bosses that'll give you that reliable old Dark Souls satisfier of a good dopamine hit when you beat them, but most gameplay obstacles are just put there to give what the game developer refers to in interviews as contrast. Contrast. Huh. So, in my quest to become a better game critic, I'm not necessarily interested in arguing whether or not Judero is a good game. The answer is obviously yes. What I'm more interested in is making sure thousands upon thousands of other people not just buy, play, and enjoy Judero, but also fully appreciate Judero. Because for as good as this game is, it is heartbreaking that it hasn't found a bigger audience. And as far as visually weird indie games by small developers in need of more coverage go, Judero is one of the easiest to recommend to mass audiences that I have played yet. It's not even really that weird. It is accessible and familiar. It's easy, it's relaxing and soothing and fun. It is fully playable and appreciatable by millions of entry-level gamers who might think they're getting dunked into the deep end of abstract art here, but are really being gently guided through an interactive literature class analysis of the timeless, universally appealing, familiar heroes' journeys that mainstream audiences love. It makes the high difficulty of high art more accessible, easy, and fun. If you've never really figured out how to appreciate poetry before, Judero might finally make it click for you. If you've never really figured out how to appreciate the aesthetic ugliness of modern art, of the styles of Cruelty Squad or Hylix, Judero might finally help that one click for you too. If you've rolled your eyes at those two words of truth and beauty that highbrow art critics like to toss around so casually, Judero might help demonstrate them for you with all the effective teaching power that being fully strapped into a full-body, immersive, interactive medium can provide. The incredibly complicated emotional response the game gave me came out in a very clean, easily understandable way. Whatever it is that whoever you're talking to means by truth and beauty, Judero understands it. So, in my quest to help thousands of other people enjoy and appreciate Judero, I set up an interview with one of its two developers, the art expert and project director, Jack King Spooner. For about an hour, our two manic minds were deeply reflecting on the kinds of truth that fiction is better equipped to explore than non-fiction.
There's an idea of truth, that meaning and truth are in relation to each other. Yeah, truth is kind of linked in my mind with art and magic and love and light and these sorts of things. What we're talking about when I say the truth in stories is not a kind of scientific truth. It's meaningful truth, which is a different thing. It's a abstract thing. It's like when you've had a girlfriend and you can't stop making eye contact. Is that truth? I mean, we live once. We only have this one time to kind of share our kind of mental landscape or seascape with the world. And if you kind of hide it behind some kind of what's going to be cool or what's going to make people go, cool, that's cool, then I think you're being cowardly.
Any halfway decent romance story is not going to begin and end its description of love as the excitement of hormonal neurotransmitters in someone's central nervous system. Likewise, the feelings experienced when going through the death of a loved one have little to nothing to do with thoughts of the metabolic processes of the 37 trillion cells in their body failing to convert nutrients into energy. The previous Jack King Spooner games were about those artistic truths, and they were never about pursuing what was cool. They're about opening yourself up emotionally to someone else's autobiographical experiences and getting something for yourself out of them.
I mean, everything's autobiographical. Even you interviewing me is an autobiography of you, isn't it? So we just gotta, if you're gonna be taking your making process seriously, you've got to be aware that it's in some relationship to autobiography.
All his games feel autobiographical to a certain extent, B-Swing most explicitly so, and back in 2014 this game probably got the most positive media coverage that all of the Jack King Spooner games have gotten so far, and I also consider that a bit heartbreaking. After Judero, I played 3 other games of his, and one thing those games did that more gamers should know about on a larger scale is that they've figured out how to very elegantly reverse the typical assumption that video game stories can't make you cry. They are some of the most effective interactive tearjerkers I've ever played. It is no surprise that To the Moon is listed as one of B-Swing's biggest inspirations.
These games mean something very, very, very different to me than they do to everyone else. For me, B-Swing was about the line between tackiness and sincerity, between open-hearted honesty and saccharine tweetness. That was the thing which I was constantly, when I was writing, I was constantly playing with this line. That's what I thought. And it was quite a humorous practice. Like, but that's a bit, you know. But then going back to like a few years, well, actually 5 years later, I was like, holy Moses, this is sad. I guess that's the truth coming through or something like that.
Judero is considerably more upbeat than B-Swing. It's not a tearjerker, although it did get me shedding a few stoic, manly tears on a few occasions, mostly from swooning at beautiful poetry, though, than by feeling some sense of heartbreaking tragedy. Judero is more funny than it is sad. Another thing that can be said about the Jack King Spooner games is that they have such a good understanding of how to trigger powerful emotional responses that the laughs are gonna hit you about as hard as the tears. That unexpected lightheartedness might come from how it's primarily sourced from a particularly humorous, lighthearted version of Celtic mythology. Judero only superficially takes place in ancient Scotland during some mythological medieval time long, long ago, but all those autobiographical details put into it also mean it kinda takes place right now in modernity, in a sort of way. But before I started playing through it for the first time on stream, I asked the developer for a reading list of inspirational materials so I could get a better idea of how to interpret the game. And that was one of the better ideas I've ever had in my life. I'd play for about 30 minutes until hitting a particularly atmospheric area where the music would get all immersive and instrumental for the sake of background atmosphere, and I'd just park my Judero hero on some kind of scenic overlook, open up a tab of the reading materials, and then voice them out on stream in the style of the ancient oral storytelling traditions. Once upon a time there lived an old cobbler who worked hard at his trade from morning till night, and scarcely gave himself a moment to eat. And suddenly, thousands of years of art history were coming to life before my very eyes. Judero's place in that history became crystal clear, as did so many inspiring interpretations of the lessons it's trying to teach. Jack King Spooner may disagree with me on this one, but I think that is my recommended way to play through Judero. The readings are currently free, they're in public domain, each short story will take you about 5, 10, 15 minutes, and the description below this video will point you to the sources. The primary source book Jack pointed me to was called Celtic Wonder Tales by Ella Young, published in 1910, and this deserves a mention all of its own. Ella Young was an Irish mythologist academic who, I kid you not, ran guns for the IRA during the early 1920s Irish War of Independence, before doing some civil disobedience where she was overstaying her visa, breaking a bunch of US immigration laws to teach lectures at the University of California, Berkeley in colorful ancient druid robes. She sounds like she would be a rough, tough, militant badass, but her collection of Celtic stories read like the soft fairy tale happy endings of an affectionate grandparent putting small children to bed. In Judero, there's this recurring theme that all the intimidating, ugly, spooky weirdos you're up against are actually big-hearted softies on the inside. The combat tutorial describes your combat as if you're just shooing away the monsters instead of actually killing them. When you defeat a boss, once their HP meter hits 0, they'll suddenly give you a funny speech about how their defeat taught them a valuable lesson about being a better person. No killing or death required. In fact, the combat in Judero is so easy and stakes are so low that relatively pacifist runs where you use the possession mechanic to avoid killing monsters entirely may actually be possible. And a similar kind of humorous whiplash hit me when going through the Celtic Wonder Tales. They are cute, soft, sweet, and funny. A good action is basically a good comedy. Cow of Plenty is a utopian boast about how amazing and fertile, how healthy, wealthy, and wonderful Ireland is. Shortening the Road is an origin story for fun storytelling itself. This collection is full of happy endings and happy characters. The bad guys aren't really much of a threat. It is a far cry from the Greek mythology I'm more used to. So it was the last one in this book, Connery More, that struck me as easily the Greekest story on the list. A young, proud king does something awful he shouldn't have, and he's cursed by a prophetic riddle to not break 9 rules over the rest of his life. And then, over the rest of his life, he gradually breaks the prophecy's riddles one by accident or dilemma, until the story ends on a tragic downer. It's a classic Greek tragedy formula. I assume that this one might have appeared when Roman warlords like Julius Caesar and Emperor Claudius were showing up and genociding their way through Western Europe to the British Isles, and sure enough, the scholars say that the tragedy story of Connery More is associated with an ancient Irish king from either the 1st century BC or AD, roughly around the centuries when that conquest was going on. The academics generally associate what the Romans would have called Gaelic culture with the same Celtic culture of the British Isles themselves. But just how much cultural connection the British Isles really had with mainland Western Europe is, now, hard to say, because of all the destruction and cultural assimilation going on back then. The indigenous cultures of the British Isles have been subjected to some form of Roman-inspired imperialism ever since, and the Irish Renaissance of the early 1900s, the Irish nationalism, patriotism, and separatism that gave us authors like Joyce and Yeats and Judero's Ella Young, are all important parts of that same timeline. And as a product of an adjacent Celtic culture that also has an axe to grind against oppressors, Judero is another one of the latest blips on that timeline too. In the scholarship surrounding ancient mythology, the magic and monsters and gods and supernatural elements, basically, are nowadays understood to be representations of something else, some projection of some layer of a deeper psychological or historical political iceberg. Biblical scholars are almost never biblical literalists. They will insist that ancient audiences were interpreting mythological stories with far more poetic imaginations than modern minds tend to do. The ancients were interpreting their stories through so many layers of allusions and metaphors that it doesn't strike me as dissimilar from the heavily metaphorical, psycho-supernatural mental mirror that is the postmodern surrealism style these days. So Judero threads this needle by deliberately describing its main quest, its central conflict, as a very clear metaphor. The antagonistic force corrupting your enemies is just a lack of closure to everyone's story. It's literally literal. The story is a story of a story. A cheeky depiction of the real-life historical witch Bessie Dunlop explicitly tells us in the game that the antagonist, called the Glass Mountain, is just a metaphor.
The Glass Mountain might represent the surmountable, near impossible challenge.
What will I find at the top of the Glass Mountain?
Conclusion, Judero. Closure. Be what it may.
She just described what it feels like for the player, not the internal logic of the fiction, nothing about the magic or pseudoscience or heroes or villains going on in the story, but rather what the emotions are going to feel like as a player when you finish a good story-driven video game. Judero is of a genre that can break the fourth wall and get literal like that without the characters doing something out of character. I mean, for example, towards the end of this very Zelda-inspired game, you'll find a character who tells you that Zelda, the Ocarina of Time, is an allegory for a boy's sexual coming of age. That's an interpretation that might have sailed over the heads of the millions who played it during their own childhood, but does ring incredibly true to the experience of what it feels like to think about 25 years later, when remembering and truly being able to understand the part of your life it will be associated with for many, many decades longer than the original playthrough.
So if you interpret that, she's quite clearly the sexual desire of Link.
Oh my goodness.
And obviously, no? That's not a crazy thing to say. Why do you say, oh my goodness? The point of those houses in Judero were to kind of say stories can be interpreted in this psychoanalytical way. Fairy tales, more specifically, fairy tales can be interpreted in this psychoanalytical way. I mean, they're pretty safe kind of things to say that, raising a sword above your head might somehow be phallic imagery. But the point of those were to say, you're also experiencing a fairy tale here, so please interpret it.
In Celtic mythology, the metaphorical creatures used to represent foreign invaders are a race of sea people called Fomorians. In Ella Young and in Judero, they aren't much of a threat. They're incompetent, they're overconfident, and they're whiny. Unlike real life, they always lose. They're almost comic relief, even though they drive the central conflicts behind a lot of the plots. Some other sources depict them as darker and scarier, but not this one. What do the Fomorians represent to you?
They represent the losers of history. So all the nomadic tribes in Scotland who got killed, whose history wasn't remembered through story. The Fomorians kind of are that collected together in stories. So they're pitiable, but they're not entirely pleasant, and that kind of goes broader to things like classmates who died at high school and whose stories don't continue, which is a bit different, a bit of a different kind of interpretation of it. But you have to look at these things and see how they expand on the universal and on the personal.
In the previous video I made, I created little animations of wargaming blocks firing volleys of musket smoke at each other. I started out with a quicker digital VFX method before instead deciding to do a much more laborious stop-motion cotton ball smoke effect in the tradition of tabletop miniature tricks that go back for about a century. And my version of this is probably not even good. I was not following a guide, it was my first time, I was figuring it out as I was going along. To the untrained eye, these probably look worse than something completely digital. But what I gained for that sacrifice was more love from a smaller portion of the audience who would have appreciated the extra effort. The tabletop miniature wargaming guys loved that video, and spotting that the animations were made out of cotton ball smoke probably sent some of those viewers just soaring over the clouds to Cloud 9. I played Judero about 2 months before making that decision, and I don't think I would have even thought that if I hadn't played Judero. Seeing how much emotional power these janky stop-motion aesthetics can pull out of you is inspiring. If you have some kind of creative job, Judero will make you want to work on a project, and might make you a better artist at whatever it is you do. So these low-budget but high-labor production values are very comfortable with audiences spotting the creator's imperfections slipping through the cracks, because they are beautiful imperfections. Everyone loves spotting the thumbprints, but some other, probably unintentional interpretations from more design stuff than aesthetic stuff include accidentally clipping the camera through a mysterious rock to tease that there is a fully explorable interior inside. When the Fomorians are landing at the beach for their invasion, I accidentally stumbled into friendly fire and died from human archers who are hitting for 5 times as much damage as the Fomorians do. Those damage values were probably calibrated that way to ensure that the invasion sequence keeps looping reliably over and over again until the player hits the proper scripts, but I ended up interpreting those damage values as a very funny joke about just how incompetent the Fomorians are. That's the kind of vivid mental stimulation I have not been getting out of games for a long, long while. I have found mainstream AAA video gaming completely uninteresting for several years now. I swear if you hooked my brain up to an MRI machine while playing Deathloop or Elden Ring or something, nothing would be lighting up. That side of the gaming industry is just doing nothing for me anymore, emotionally. And as a longtime game critic of 15 years who kind of depends on being able to activate a passion for this stuff, noticing how bored I would get was genuinely distressing. For a while, I thought it was purely neurological. I thought it was just depression, but I've tested myself, and a lot of games will still activate the dopamine and serotonin that conventional AAA games will not. Metal Gear Solid still does it, Hunt Showdown still does it. I can even reliably still feel the euphoria of loving a genius game design when playing a match of chess, of all things.
Hey!
There are sensory neurons which take information from the world.
And last year, I went through a lot of creative, weird, and wonderful indie games that would have made my MRI brain machine display flash like an old new wave music video.
No, I stop! I can't! Oh my god! Oh my
Judero probably would have had it flashing the hardest of them all. But that is just me, though. Jack King Spooner does not feel that same disillusionment. He still feels a passion for loving new AAA Zelda games, and maybe that kind of passion is what was needed to make Judero as good as it is.
I like the Zelda games a lot. I mean, every time I play a new Zelda game, well, I've not played that Echoes one, that looks shit. Every time I play a new, proper, big Zelda game, Tears of the Kingdom and things, every time I think, wow, this is actually the best game which has ever been made. I've thought that ever since playing the Game Boy one. Yeah, so I like video games a lot.
If you like video games a lot, you'll probably love Judero. If you've played only one or two Zelda games but liked them a lot, you'll probably love Judero. If you used to like video games but have been finding it more difficult lately, you'll probably love Judero. It is using an ancient, very reliable, time-tested method to make its audience feel some of the most truthful and beautiful emotions the human imagination can feel. You ever got into the Nietzsche on the origins of theater essay where he posits that the Greeks developed theater as a mimicry of the dreams that they were having?
But that's not crazy.
It's not crazy.
It's not some far out belief. I mean, that's just essentially what poetic truth is. And the mythology, the storytelling is a kind of grounding of poetic truth, something raw, unacademic of a culture, which is it's not Nietzsche's most daring take, I have to say. I think mythology is dream is an important interpretation.
I think it's an important reminder that the psychology we're working with today is not radically fundamentally different from what people were doing thousands of years ago.
The difference is we're stupid enough to try and make it's stupid enough to intellectualize it. Maybe.
Judero! Please support small, weird indie games made by people with passion. Please keep an eye out for Jack and Talha's next game, Machina, which is already well in the works. Also, Judero is a game deeply invested in a certain type of, national pride that is associated with a messy modern history you may be better off learning away from YouTube. Real-life lore has an excellent historical narrative on the Great Famine to the Troubles, and Wonder Why was doing some great coverage of the Scottish independence movement going on a few years back. These aren't necessarily unrelated or tangential materials for appreciating Judero. The game has a certain kind of humor and outlook to it that will make a lot more sense after going through these histories. And ironically, the fictions too. Celtic mythology is one of the more prolific categories of it out there, and Extra History has a few videos on some of the very same sources Judero is pulling from, including the Scottish story that inspired one of Game of Thrones' most famous episodes. And a much more helpful place to watch these for us creators is Nebula, a creator-owned streaming service that is doing me a solid here. And it's also where the best, most thoughtful video essays can be found in one easy place, earlier than on YouTube too. Supporting Nebula is a great way to keep us creators able to make bigger, more ambitious projects that take a while and hit a level of production value way higher than the norm. Nebula has also been getting into high-budget studio quality productions, with stuff like Dracula's Ex-Girlfriend, or Night of the Coconut, or Identities. And speaking as a creator, Nebula has always been a great way to support big ambitious projects that take a while. So by signing up, you'd be supporting an economy that supports some of the most inspiring video creators alive today. And you'll be getting a bunch of exclusive content for it too. Just go to nebula.tv/superbunnyhop or scan the QR code to the side and you'll get a $3 a month annual subscription, which brings your annual total to just $36 a year, 46% off the regular rate. They're also offering a lifetime subscription for $300 that will help you access Nebula forever, and help us invest in more big-budget, high-quality productions. I also want to promote my fun streaming projects, Metal Gear Mondays, where I play old Metal Gear games in interesting new ways, like experimenting with how permadeath rules across the entire series would work. Free Stream Fridays are wildcard variety streams, where I'm not just playing weird indie games, but also like reading gaming nonfiction or playing big brain turn-based strategy games while listening to educational lectures. And last but not least are the rewards gained from the Super Bunny Hop Patreon, where you can find the extended cut of all the crazy answers about art and truth and beauty that Jack gave me that wouldn't elegantly fit into the review-style format of most of this video. And then there is the Patreon Super Bunny server, where I've been hosting productivity hangout sessions with fans while working on these videos, and Discord movie night watch parties to spread the love about the topics I'm getting into. We watched Waterloo last time, when I finished making my Napoleon movie, we watched the best Napoleon movie. So thanks to all the sponsors and to all the Patreons who are supporting me through some very tough times. Thanks for watching. And an especially big thanks to Jack and Talha for sharing Judero with the world.